Well, here we are in session 10, getting nearer the end of our sessions on Jubilee, God's Jubilee. Looking today at Leviticus 25, verses 29 through 34, about 6 verses. Title, Redemption, Levites, and the Firstborn. It seems that God felt the need to deal with towns, villages, walled cities, and the Levites before closing out his work on Jubilee. As we've mentioned the land rules, we've examined all assumed that the land was open farmland, not land associated with cities and towns. So, what happens when you do have a city and town? The walled cities, which most of the Levites' 48 cities were walled cities, the walled cities required special consideration. They were special, and living in them was not a right, it was a privilege, because there were some added costs that were involved, such as walled cities were fortified cities. If you're going to live in a walled city, you're going to live in a house. So on the land that's enclosed by the walls, there were improvements in the terms of the houses, and so costs will go up and so forth and so forth. They were special, and living in them was, again, as I said, not a right. It was a privilege. Not everyone could live there. They didn't have vast housing developers, I guess, in those days. How was it different for walled cities? Well, homes tended to be more expensive. There were no open lands of any significance within a walled city. The house represented an improvement to the lot where the house was occupied. Let me blow this up a bit. It was different for a walled city because the homes tended to be more expensive. There were no open lands of any significance in a walled city. The house represented an improvement to the lot it occupied, increasing the lot's value. The value of a lot with a house represented a bona fide premium. And don't forget the value of living in a fortified city. You were less susceptible to different kinds of, I suppose, criminal activities, warlike activities. You tend to be protected a little more from them. So, let's call such a piece of property city property to identify it from open land. Well, the first thing we'll note is that Jubilee rules didn't apply to property in the walled cities. Let's take a look at that in verses 29 and 30 of Leviticus 25. It says, likewise, if a man sells a dwelling house in a walled city, then his redemption right remains valid. Currently, there is some restriction on the right to redeem land that you have sold. Let's check that out. Remember, it says his redemption right remains valid, just as it is under Jubilee rules, until a full year from its sale. Then what happens? His right of redemption lasts a full year, then what? But if it is not bought back for him within the space of a full year, then the house that is in the walled city passes permanently to its purchaser. Throughout his generations, it does not revert in the Jubilee. So, 4 and 6. Well, what does that mean? That means that you have a year to redeem the property if you wish. If you do not, it's gone. It's no longer yours. Jubilee rules are not in effect any further. So what do we have with the sale of a house in a walled city then? A limited redemption right, a 1-year grace period. Jubilee did not figure into it. Flubber up in the year and redemption becomes impossible. In other words, don't get her done in a year, procrastinate, flubber, whatever, and it's gone. You no longer have that right of redemption. How would the right for redemption of a house or a lot in a walled city affect one's becoming a housing developer? It would be better than it would be under Jubilee, wouldn't it? Because you can gain back some of that land that you sell. Could this have been part of God's plan? I don't have a clue. What are some differences in selling one's land versus selling one's house in a walled city? Well, the selling of a house could be permanent. The selling of land outside a walled town are not permanent. No such sales is permanent. So, let's go to verse 31 of Leviticus 25. The houses of the villages, however, now this is a village. It means it's not a walled city. The houses of the village, however, which have no surrounding wall, shall be considered as open fields. Translation: the Jubilee rules are in full effect in the smaller villages and towns that are not walled. They have the redemption rights and revert in the Jubilee. So all the Jubilee principles and rules apply to unwalled towns. Selling in unwalled towns and villages comes under Jubilee rules fully. But let's back up a moment. Among the walled cities, we find the Levitical cities. As we mentioned, virtually all Levitical cities were walled. How are they different? Well, suppose a Levitical city had the usual walled city rules of redemption. Wouldn't it be possible for all the houses to eventually be lost to the Levites through that 1-year rule? I'd say theoretically, yes. In other words, a Levitical city could theoretically be lost to the Levites. So, we go on to verse 32 and 33. God leaves relatively little to the imagination. So, Leviticus 25, 32, and 33. As for cities of the Levites have a permanent right of redemption. So if the walled city is a Levite city, things change. The owner who sells has full Jubilee-like redemption rights. For the houses of the cities which are their possession. So whatever's in a Levite city, one has permanent right of redemption, which means the Jubilee rules all apply. Verse 33, What therefore belongs to the Levites may be redeemed, and a house sale in the city of this possession reverts in the Jubilee. For the houses of the cities of Levites are their possession among the sons of Israel. That's what they get. Excuse me. But why did the Levites get special consideration? Well, first place, they didn't get any land in the allotment, but there's a little more to it than that. They received no land, so special consideration for special servants of Yahweh. They got special consideration in their walled cities. Their houses were all they had. At least that was all that was theirs permanently by rule of Yahweh. And their pasture lands, if you remember, there were pasture lands around the city. But in verse 34, it says, "But pasture fields of the Levites' cities shall not be sold, for that is their perpetual possession." They weren't allotted any land, but where they had these 48 cities, they had pasture lands all around the 48 cities. So their lands were for their perpetual use, but they were not, in fact, allotted to them. Technically, they were still allotted to the tribe in which they fell. They neither inherited lands, these pasture lands, nor they were allotted. They were not owned. They didn't own any land, but they had the right, perpetual right to their use. And they could not sell it because they did not own it by allotment. So, what are these pasture fields? How extensive are they? Well, let's go back to Joshua and see if we can find out. Joshua 21, the first 3 verses. Then the heads of households of the Levites, and there were 3 general at that time, they approached Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun, and the heads of the households of the tribes, all the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. And they, the Levites, spoke to this group at Shiloh in the land of Canaan, saying, "The Lord commanded through Moses to give us cities to live in, with their pasture lands for our cattle." So the Levites were evidently not under any kind of vow of poverty. They could have cattle. They could have other animals, I suspect. Verse 3, "So the sons of Israel gave the Levites from their own inheritance these cities with their pasture lands, which were external to the walls of the city, according to the command of Yahweh." The tribes answered their request favorably. Joshua 21:41. All the cities of the Levites in the midst of the possession of the sons of Israel were 48 cities with their pasture lands. The notion of pasture lands surrounding towns was neither new nor unique to Israel. If we go back to Genesis 14, we found it in existence then. Genesis 41, verse 48. "So he," and this is Joseph at that time, "gathered all the food of these 7 years, the 7 years of fat harvest in preparation for the 7 years of drought and downtime, of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt, and placed food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its surrounding fields. So even in Egypt they had this idea of pasture lands, or this case it sounds like they were agricultural lands that surrounded the cities. But Numbers 35 tells us even more. Likely is what Yahweh told Moses, we would suspect. Numbers 35 verse 4. The pasture lands of the cities which you shall give to the Levites shall extend from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits around. Oh me. 1,000 cubits would be roughly, 1,500 feet? That's roughly 500 yards. That would be equivalent of 5 football fields long. So if you put 5 football fields long band around these walled cities, that's what you've got for pasture lands. They were for the livestock of the Levites. They were not under any vow of poverty, as we mentioned, apparently at least. The pastures were for their perpetual use, even though remained part of the original allotment of whatever particular tribe it fell in. There's another part of that assignment. The assignment set aside was twice as deep, forming a sort of green buffer around the city and pasture lands. In other words, with it also went another 5 football fields deep all the way around it, which was, in essence, greenland, or a green buffer around it. At least that's what it appears to me to look like. And check again to see that the pasture lands were not for farming of crops, but were designed for livestock use. The Levites, then, what do we have for Levites? No land allotment, 48 cities named, special rules for the houses in the cities, special rules for the pasture lands around it, no vow of poverty, no prevention of ownership of the houses. How practical for Levites serving Yahweh. That you don't have any land of your own by allotment, but look at what I have given you, because you are my servants. Maybe even how sweet it was. As you're a Levite, was it sweet? I'm not sure how they would have felt. I know Levites in Scripture are all over the place. They're not restricted to those 48 cities. Oh, so what have we seen? Jubilee rules for open land and unwalled towns and villages. Restricted rules for houses in walled cities. Jubilee rules are not in play. Redemption is limited to a 1-year grace period. Special case for Levites within Levitical cities. Back to Jubilee rules with restrictions against selling their pasture lands. God considers all the likely needs, all the needed rules, and this is what we have for the preservation of the society in Israel. A society that is reset in terms of debt and oppression and so forth every 50 years at least, partially set in place every 7 years, on the 7th year, with the 7th year Sabbath year for the land and so forth. So just one further note today, in Europe during the Middle Ages, that would be somewhere between 500 AD and 1000 AD, some go to 1500 AD, the lands devoted to the church were treated as lands owned by the church in perpetuity. The church was, of course, the Roman Catholic Church. Its lands were considered inviolable, untaxable, and unsellable. Ever how the Roman Church probably had to be it, because every time they got something new in terms of a contribution of land, it stayed with them. If they bought land, it stayed with them. So their wealth could only grow. But along with that, Islamic lands dedicated to Allah in the Middle East today are also held in perpetuity like Roman properties in Europe of the Middle Ages. So, what goes around comes around. Well, that's the end of our session for today. Another shorter session. We're going to have one or two more of these short sessions, I think, as we wrap it up. So, I've forgotten what next time looks like. Somebody says, when you write these things, when you do these things, when you prepare these lessons, don't you remember them? And the answer is not until I go through them generally. So, hang in there. Come back. Next time we'll look at the next few verses, somewhere between 5 and 10 verses next. And we'll get on with finishing up the work on